very briefly, and maybe we'll talk more about it in a little bit, I had come across references that doctors were conducting autopsies on slain soldiers behind the lines. And I thought, isn't that interesting? I know a lot about the war, but I hadn't realized that was occurring. And because, you think of these grand sweeping battles of the Somme and Passchendaele and thousands of soldiers killed or wounded. When could they have had time to do autopsies? But they did have time. But as part of that, and it came through a number of archival documents, it looked to me like they were also removing soldiers' body parts. And I thought, well, that just can't be. These are, if we think of the Great War, young men, fathers, uncles, brothers who enlist for king and country to fight in what was then seen as a just war to liberate Belgium and France, to stand by Britain. How could we be harvesting their body parts? And so, John, I spent years looking for the files at the National Archives, and eventually I found them. And they indeed revealed that there was an official British program, of which the Canadians were a part of and willingly a part of, to remove soldiers' body parts for study, to really create medical specimens. And I found that quite shocking.
Is this during an era when we see this kind of practice in other ways? Maybe not from soldiers at the front line, but people who have died from certain ailments in a hospital, and we see them being used for medical, I don't want to use the term experiments, but they're being used for research and such. Is this at that same time? Is this going on in other places in Canada as well as this particular move?
Yeah, in Canada, in the United States, in Britain, in the Western world, certainly. And you're exactly right. Once I got over my surprise or shock that they were harvesting Canadian and British soldiers' body parts, I then, of course, delved into the literature. And of course, that's how doctors learned in the late 19th century, early 20th century. The secrets of the dead helped the doctors treat the living. And that was how they were learning. And one of the themes in the book is the learning process that goes on for all the doctors and nurses and caregivers. They were confronted with horrific wounds from shrapnel and high explosives and machine guns, where soldiers would come in with, a dozen bullets in their body or more, chemical agents, all of which I talk about in the book. And then, of course, this is before the age of antibiotics. So most of these wounds were infected, and doctors in 1914, early 1915 are operating and saving lives only to find that soldiers are succumbing to infection days or perhaps a week later. So there's a constant learning process, new surgical techniques, the use of blood transfusions and x-rays. And what also surprised me, lectures behind the lines to share the lessons from more senior doctors to junior doctors, because this is a war where half of all Canadian doctors are serving in uniform, just an astonishing commitment. And yet, John, this had never been written about. The harvesting of body parts, the removal of brains with bullet wounds, the extraction of mustard gassed lungs, the extraction of spines that had been shattered, and all kinds of other wounds. And I thought, why had that never been written about? Was it a conspiracy? Oh, no, it wasn't. It's just that there are many aspects of the war that haven't been written about. And yet, one of the things I grapple with in the book, again, is this contradiction between life-saving and body snatching, or the desire to learn from the dead. And this continues after the war, without giving away too much, because there's a great book for sale. But, almost 800 of these body parts come back to Canada. And there's a great clash I write about between the desire to commemorate the fallen, as they were called, the building of thousands of memorials. Almost every city, town, and village built cenotaphs, meaning empty graves. We had stained glass windows, commemorative texts, war trophies came back. There were naming of structures after fallen soldiers. How do you have that commemorative impulse that was so strong, the creation of our Vimy Memorial overseas and others, and then you're also okay, though, with the fact that these soldiers who have died for king and country continue to serve on as medical specimens?
Mm-hmm.